Let's see if we're going live now. Stream says we are. I'm not seeing anything yet, though, on YouTube. See how long it takes for it to go live here. Why are we not live? This is very weird. Doesn't make any sense. I should be streaming.
Maybe we got pulled by the network.
No, I don't think so. I think it's probably just
canceled before we even started.
Yeah.
Canceled before we even started.
Well, it should be going. Okay, I think we are live. At least I got.
Maybe you need to roll your intro before it actually comes up on the screen, Chris.
No, I think I just got the wrong URL pulled up here. Yeah, we are live, and I just didn't even notice it. I had the wrong URL pulled up. So let me go live here. Okay, everybody. I guess we're live. So welcome to Grumpy Roadie's first live show, Shop Talk Live, and today's subject matter is Black Lives Matter. And for that, without further ado, let's get going.
Adrian.
Good evening, and welcome to a very special live episode of Shop Talk. We have seen over the past couple of weeks worldwide protesting over the murder of George Floyd and the deaths of countless other African Americans at the hands of police forces. We have the opportunity now to reflect and demand change to take further steps to fight racism. Today, I'm stepping away from the host chair to listen to what our panel has to say and assist behind the scenes, as the subject for today is Black Lives Matter. You can ask questions in the comment feed on YouTube, and we will be addressing these live on the show. Please be respectful in your questions. We will not tolerate any questions that are hurtful towards others. I'd also like to add that you could donate to this cause by visiting blacklivesmatter.com. Lastly, I'm here to introduce your host for this evening, Mr. Adrian Sterling. Buckle up, people, because Shop Talk starts now. Adrian, over to you, sir.
Hello, and welcome to Shop Talk Live, Black Lives Matter. I'm Adrian Sterling. Thank you, Grumpy Roadie, for asking me to moderate this discussion. Let me jump right in and introduce our panel. We have Patrice Augustin, a video engineer at Encore Productions. Patrice, would you like to say a couple of words?
What's up, folks? How y'all doing?
We also have Pauline Blackwood, a freelance audio technician. We have Adrian Ulysses. Adrian is a audio video technician and the owner of Aces Audio Visual Solutions. Hello, Adrian.
Good evening, good evening.
Okay. In recent times, we've seen the Black Lives movement gathering much more traction than it seems it ever has before. And one thing that we were wondering is why now? Racism and brutality against minorities has been going on for a very long time. What has made the recent events different than anything that's happened in the past?
I guess I'll jump in. I think the pandemic situation is, I guess, more, as unique as the response has been. The pandemic situation is also a unique situation. So I think the two situations kind of compounding one another, where you've got more people than ever at home with plenty of time on their hands, and you have the emergence of these videos of these situations happening. And we've seen videos like these in the past, but I don't think we've all had the collective free time to really be affected by the happenings. A lot of time you get the video and then you're off to whatever it is that you're doing, onto the next show or whatever, and it may come up in conversation while you're working and things like that, but you're keeping it moving. Whereas now you've got more people than ever before that really have nothing but time on their hands, and then all of a sudden you've got these videos, and it wasn't just one. As much as George Floyd is kind of the poster for it, you kind of had the Amy Cooper situation and the Ahmaud Arbery situations. You have had multiples of these sort of all happening in this unique time period where folks have nothing to do but to take in more of this content than ever before, and ultimately be affected by it.
So I guess with a lot of things that happen just anywhere else in our lives, when we have more time to actually contemplate something and actually think about it is when we actually react more and internalize what's going on. Does anybody else have any takes on that? I mean, we could always circle around to that as well. And the media has opened a lot of our eyes to racial problems in our society. Grumpy Roadie is a AV industry-centric show. Do any of you have any personal experiences with racism in the industry that you would care to share?
There's only one time that it was really blatant, and the person I was working with used the N-word, and I was really taken aback. But since he was a supervisor, unfortunately, I didn't uh, do anything and follow it up at that time. Um, but now now would it be easier? I might be a little bit easier, but I'd still be afraid of speaking up about an incident, and maybe losing work, or uh, being seen as like a troublemaker, or being like you're just overreacting type of thing. So yeah.
Sorry you had to go through that, Pauline. We recently had an inclusion episode on Grumpy Roadie. We spoke about different levels of inclusion and different levels of racism. And some of us have had very large scale, very traumatic things happen to us at certain times. And sometimes it's almost a micro racist situation that might exist that we may not necessarily want to bring up or rock the boat. One of the things I had talked about in that episode was just being careful to tuning the PA, not play music that was too black because I didn't want to be the black guy in the room, or things like that. And you're doing things to fit in because you want to be included. And when you look back at some of those things, you try to figure out why that inclusion, why you felt that way, why you felt you had to change yourself to be included or to be not singled out. I don't know if any of you guys have experienced anything like that or anything that you would like to talk about.
I don't think it's so much, for me at least, about inclusion as much as it is not being judged for the wrong things, because in my experience, I've been across, many different industries, and actually the AV industry is probably the one that I've experienced the least amount of racism. I kind of feel like a large percent of AV technicians overall are, pretty well-rounded people, very much high vibrational people, and I haven't had too many bad experiences, at least not in Canada, yeah, so my thing coming into this industry, and why I can relate to what you're saying about not wanting to play certain types of music and this and that, but more so for than it being for inclusion is really for not being judged, because people tend to see you and succumb to all these stereotypes very quickly, and I think that experience, at least in America, when I came to Canada, it kind of made me try to suppress certain things about myself to not be judged by the people around me and not potentially risk opportunities, to get further in the industry,
Absolutely. And something that jumped out that you just said there, Therese, is when you said, especially not in Canada, and that you felt much more included in the AV industry in Canada than you have in other industries that you've been a part of. And I think that's something that's great to say about the industry and about the country that we all live and work in. But that also makes me think we're watching a lot of these things that are shown to us from American cities, and how do we feel about the differences between Canada and America and the United States of America with both inside of our industry and outside of our industry. Just, I'm not sure how many of you travel to the States for work. I do quite a bit. And I have some experiences there, and I have plenty of experience here. And I was just wondering if anybody felt that there were any differences.
Well, I grew up in the States, so I was born in Canada and grew up in the States. So I got pretty extensive experience in all fields, in all kind of industries, in both countries. And, one difference that I when people ask me, that's a question I actually get asked quite often, and a big difference that I feel is that in the States, the racism is more like, it's more blatant and it's more like hate driven. Like you really see that hate and they just hate you. Whereas in Canada, it's not as much hatred for one. It feels like more of ignorance and programming, you know what I mean? And it's like, they might view you based on the things that they've heard or seen on TV or whatever, but not as much based on, who you are,
I know. I think I agree a fair bit. I think I'd probably put it more so as Canada is more subtle about the racism, whereas in the States it's definitely overt. It's in your face, and then industry to industry, I find it can, even in the States, it can be subtle. Where I've had experiences in other industries where. In dealing with some folks down in California, you're on the phone with them for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and you finally meet them in person and say, "Oh, you're Adrian."
Mm-hmm.
So it was so
Exactly.
and to a Black person, that's basically code for, I didn't know you were Black.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So in the corporate side of things, it can be a little bit subtle, little more subtle in the States, but in general, I find it's definitely more overt. It's more in your face. It's I remember driving from Atlanta to Orlando, and this is probably 2002, 2003. So I mean, it's fairly recent times. I pulled in, got some gas at the gas station, and went inside to go use the bathroom. I walked in, and it was literally a scene out of a movie. It was a truck stop, so majority, or pretty much all white people, and a hush fell across the restaurant. Like I've only experienced that a few times in my life, but where it was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna hold it. And I got back in my car, and I kept driving to like a McDonald's or something like that, because it was like, it was clear that they had no desire to see me where I was. So again, I think in the States it's more overt like that, but in Canada it's definitely a lot more subtle.
So if I
Right,
can
knowing
pipe in here real quick with a
which
question.
exit of the interstate is good to get off on, and which exit is not so good to get off on.
Right.
Can I just jump in here with a quick question? So when you're saying there's a noticeable difference between the States and Canada, do you think there is a difference in the nature of it being systemic versus being on a case by case or a regional situation?
I think it can be just as systemic in Canada as it is in the US, but I'm not sure how to explain it, but I just find in the States, they don't mince when it comes to Black versus white. There's places where you go, like Adrian said, which exit to not pull off on the interstate. There's places where it's like, it's point blank and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Whereas in Canada, I think that it's a lot more subdued. I don't, minus the war, I think we likely have very similar, for lack of a better term, racist histories. We not necessarily as much in slavery, but when you talk about indigenous people, we're very much, it's almost apples to apples, right? So there, and I think the racism towards indigenous people kind of stretched on much further before it sort of transitioned to Black people, whereas in the States, the transition from indigenous to black racism was a lot further back. So they've had a lot more time, I guess, with their whatever their feelings are to let them fester.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that answers my question pretty well, I'd say.
How do we feel about we have protests now, we have Black Lives Matter is stronger than ever, it seems. Do we think that all of this spotlight, all of this media, all of this attention that's on this topic at this time is actually going to affect some change? Do we think that the change is positive change that's going to affect? Or does it just fizzle out in the next few weeks? How does this go? How do we see this going?
Kind of a double-edged sword, right? It's like, from one perspective, a light of.
I think I lost you for a sec, Trees.
A lot of.
I don't think he's freezing up.
You hear me?
I think he's got probably a jaggedy connection or something.
We might have lost Trees for a second there. But feel free if anybody else wants to jump in on that.
I was wondering the other day if the momentum will carry on once we start reopening after as more places become open, and it's not as upfront as it has been, and but on the other hand, the fact that it wasn't just the protests weren't just in Canada and U.S., but they were all over the world, and that I was totally blown away by that, because it tells me, it showed me that this is a global issue with because each country has their own indigenous or native populations that have probably gone through the same systematic racism as we have here in North America. So I think that it will. I think it will continue. Maybe not the protests, but the awareness and the fact that it's been brought out into the global spotlight, so to speak. Like, you can't hide it anymore. You can't hide behind your governments or anymore. It's out there, and I think I think will continue. And this was sort of like the spark that started it all.
The enhancements of social media and our camera phones, our smartphones, all of that, we've been able to actually document a lot of what's happened in recent times. And one thing that people are saying, and that we know to be true, is that a lot of these issues, are not just starting to happen now, but that they're being documented now and people can see them. So speaking to your point, Pauline, that these things are illuminated and they're being illuminated all over the world and people are looking. So hopefully this doesn't slow down. Hopefully, as we go back to our various industries and whatnot, as the world starts to start up again out of COVID, like we're in the middle of two different crises this year. We're in the middle of the COVID crisis, and we're in the middle of the Black Lives Matter crisis, and it's I feel, especially in the U.S. I'm happy to be in Canada at this time because of the social programs we have economically and whatnot. And I feel like some of the things, speaking to what you were saying, Adrian, about people in the United States having more time, not only do they have more time, but they're angry. They've been told to sit at home. They have no money. And then, so now they are sitting at home with no money, not able to feed their families, and flipping on the TV or the social media or the smartphone or whatever, and they're seeing their brothers and sisters get killed in the street, and they're just angry.
Definitely.
Do you feel that might get watered down on this side of the border a little bit?
I mean, the experiences of a Black man in Canada compared to America is watered down to begin with. You know what I mean? Like, just, it's different out there. I could tell you, like, I got, some of my white friends will call me up and be like, hey, yo, Treese, you all right? I'm like, dude, I'm fine. I've been going through this, since I was a little kid. Like I'm programmed to this, as not, that's not necessarily a good thing, but I'm kind of
accustomed to it.
It's like, it's just part of life.
Yeah, I don't know if it will. I think it might still carry forward. I was joking the other day with a friend of mine saying that politicians, their primary job above everything else is to get reelected. So because of the global impact of the movement right now, in the US, you're going into an election year. Or not going into they're in an election year. I think that with the movement being global, I think there might be just enough momentum to actually affect change, because really what it takes is politicians to pass laws and those types of things. So I think there's going to be, because it's global, there's going to be just enough steam to kind of keep it rolling to actually see significant changes worldwide.
Speaking of the politicians needed to affect change and to affect laws, are any of you surprised that this was not addressed in the U.S. In the previous administration rather than during this administration?
Not at all.
No.
not surprised in the slightest. I think the reality of Obama's presidency, from my perspective, at the very least, was Obama's presidency seemed to birth obstructionist politics, where no matter what he was going to put forward, even if it was something that the other party would historically support, they were going to obstruct him, come what may. That in and of itself, I believe there were definitely racist ideologies behind that, but the reality was that nothing that he was going to do was going to come easy. And I think even if he wanted to institute the type of change that I think is going to come about from this, I think had he been president now, I think you would have seen a lot more. But based on sort of how things went for his 8 years, he never had an opportunity like this. As many of these kind of high-profile shootings or killings or police brutality, those types of things that happened throughout his 8 years, and a lot of time they happened, and he would address them, but it was never a big enough movement for him to be able to, for lack of a better term, push through any type of significant change. And unfortunately, the current president that's not the guy that's going to do it. Unfortunately, I don't see him as the guy that's going to champion that cause, the Black Lives Matter cause. It's not. He's from what I've seen, he's just not that guy.
Treese, I think you were going to jump in a little bit as well, just before Adrian.
If I was, that might have slipped my mind.
My apologies for cutting you off.
No problem, brother. We do have an online question from a younger viewer. Unique asks, why do people act like this? George Floyd did nothing wrong. Why do people act so mean and heartless? That's a hard one for any of us to answer, but does anybody want to jump in there?
I have a real easy answer, and it's just that it's just the duality of the world we live in, that it's like they're good depends on evil and evil depends on good. The both of them depend on each other. They must coexist. One can't exist without the other. So, there's going to be evil with good. If you're a good person and a good heart, it's a waste of time trying to justify what evil, wicked-hearted people are, why they do what they do. Because if you have a good heart, you can't fathom it, So it's just good enough to accept that in the world, there's good and there's evil, and that's just the way it is,
I think the other answer, I think it is they're taught. They literally, I mean, we've seen countless videos of the two little kids. They run together. I mean, I've got a 6 and an 8-year-old, and helping them to understand this whole situation is a challenge in and of itself. But the reality is that people are not born hating. They don't hate someone, whether it be the color of their skin, way they speak, whatever it is. Hate is typically taught, whether it's taught from one person to another or it's taught through your lived experiences. And if it's taught through your lived experiences, it's up to you as to how you choose to react to those things. But ultimately, to the simplistic answer is they're taught to hate. They can't there's really no other justification as to why they hate other than and especially for something as inconsequential as the color of a person's skin. It's basically it's taught, it's learned behavior.
Well, here's something I'm going to switch gears to a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
A response that has been out there to Black Lives Matter is all lives matter. How should we respond to that?
you know how what's the name of there's these books that are called, you know, for dummies, right? And it's like, you know, they break down exactly, they assume you know nothing, you know what I mean? And
so we have to
so what I'm saying is, maybe the name Black Lives Matter is not, you know, I said this from day one, actually. What it should have been was Black Lives Matter too. You know, or Black Lives Matter as well.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Then, because then for the idiots, you know, for the dummies out there, then they get it. That we're not trying to say that your life doesn't matter. You know, we're just trying to say that Black people's lives matter too.
Exactly.
You know? And you know, I think that would have definitely solved the problem. But for, you know, for those people, you know, that, you know, I mean, ultimately for that movement to get through to more people, that's probably what should have been done. Black Lives Matter too. Because so many people just are able to look at the surface and not anywhere, you know?
You know, honestly, that's a really good point, because I'm going to be honest here. I used to be one of those people that didn't get it, and I used to respond with all lives matter because I didn't get it. But this is how I learned it. Let me put it this way. Like somebody explained it to me like this. Look at it this way. If your kid gets run over by a drunk driver and you and your neighbors have been petitioning for a speed limit on the street, and you go to your city council and say, listen, my kid died. It's time for that speed limit. And the guy responds, well, why are you so upset? Everybody's kid dies eventually. You know, and I'm going like, yeah, but that may be truthful, but at the same time, in this context, it's very hurtful and very wrong to say.
Absolutely.
And that's when it clicked to me what it actually meant or what it was trying to say.
Right.
And like honestly, I didn't get it beforehand, and I can understand why a lot of other white guys don't get it. And ever since like I've learned that, I've been trying to share that with my fellow Paleys, you know, and hopefully hopefully some of those guys are listening now and maybe get it, you know, because it made sense to me at that point. And I felt like so bad of my previous behavior, even though it was completely innocent and I meant nothing by it, you know. But yeah, once you realize how you come across, even though you're trying to be benevolent and you realize it's bad, then you got to change your behavior, right?
Absolutely. It's what I call unconscious ignorance. You didn't know what you didn't know.
Exactly.
Right? But now that you know, you're not ignorant anymore. So if someone has given you that analogy and that example, and you still choose to say, well, all lives matter, that's where I'm like, okay, well, yeah, you're being an idiot now because you're not ignorant anymore. You have the knowledge.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. And fighting ignorance is what this channel is about and what this show is about, right? Because we don't solve this problem unless we talk about it. And we all talk about it. You know, if only the white guys talk about it, or only the black guys, or the red guys, or the green, or the purple guys, we're not going to solve it. We all have to talk about this together.
Absolutely.
That's the only way we can fix this.
I think Steve's got his hand up.
Yep. Sorry, just because I'm not on the stream all that much right now because I'm monitoring the chat. One thing that I thought that Adrian Sterling brought up as a great point on our last episode is that it almost feels like people from the Black community almost have like an obligation of sorts to have to educate other people. And it's like, well, you know, like that's not exactly the way it should be. Now that, like, for instance, what Chris just said about all lives matter and not knowing the difference, and now that you know the difference, you know, it's good for us to, you know, pass along that information so it doesn't always fall on, you know, the other cultures that are being oppressed against. You know, we have to play our part too to be able to get this message out and realize, like, in the end of it, just how silly it really is. You know, you guys are some of the best people I've ever worked with in my life. And that has nothing to do with the skin, you know, the color of your skin or anything like that. It just seems so silly that we're still so wrapped up in hate.
Absolutely.
That's my 2 cents anyways. Thank you.
No, amazing, Steve.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And we have Chris he was saying that he did not know before and he did not understand before, and now he does understand. So what, as a white person, he's saying that. So how do we feel? What can white people do to move forward this cause?
I think ask questions and listen. Because again, going back to the unconscious ignorance thing, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. But part of gaining knowledge is understanding that when you hear Black Lives Matter or I Can't Breathe or any of these systematic oppression, white privilege, all these buzzwords, if you don't understand what the messaging behind it is, don't jump to a conclusion, ask a question. And when you ask the question, listen, don't listen to respond, listen to actually take in the information, and then even take it a step further, and then do some of your own homework and try to understand where this is coming from. Try to understand some of the actual history, because I not to divert, but it always blows my mind that specifically in the U.S., but also in Canada, we celebrate in the U.S. it's Christopher Columbus Day. Why? I don't understand why more people haven't come to the realization that he wasn't a good dude. Why are we celebrating him? Right? I mean, it's 2020. Information is all over, but again, there are many unconsciously ignorant people out there, and a lot of them haven't asked the questions. They've just taken it as, well, I fly my rebel flag because my grandfather fought in that war. Never really took a time to understand the reasons behind that war and why a group of people would be so hurt by just the sight of the flag, right? So you've got to ask
just on that.
Say again?
We could probably have a whole episode just on that.
Yeah, and then in that episode, somebody should explain to me why Americans are so obsessed with celebrating losing a war. I've never
depends
seen
on what depends on what side you're on.
Yeah, but I mean, nobody else waves the flag around of the losing side in a war and is proud of it, except the Americans. I've never seen it anywhere else on the planet.
True. Very, very true. Because I guess even though they lost, they still think they should have won.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they're so ignorant that they chalk it down as a moral victory. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? Again, that as Adrian said, that could be a whole other episode on its own.
Well, I'll take a note of that for when we need more subject matter.
I'm going to cross the line from moderator to speaker for just a moment, and just say that I personally feel that one thing that you listed there, Adrian, was white privilege. And I think part of white privilege is having a larger voice. And I feel that sometimes the Black voice is not heard, not because people are not hearing the words that are coming out of the Black individual, but from lack of understanding of where that Black person is coming from. So the topic that person is speaking of is just thought of as maybe an afterthought or something that's not as important as something else that might be spoken about by a white person. And I think that one thing that we can ask, again, we're talking more so because Grumpy Roadie in our industry, but also in a wider scope in society, if we could ask our white friends and coworkers and counterparts to actually have a voice for and with us, as opposed to, which is actually something that's happening, and I think it could happen to a bigger scale, where we can have more than just Black people saying Black Lives Matter and having a larger society on the whole talk about Black Lives Matter. I just wanted
Adrian,
to
on
stop.
that note, let me just cut in real quick. I just got a news flash that in Berlin, in Germany, they have the largest Black Lives Matter protest outside of the U.S. going on right now. This is Berlin. These are the Germans, and if anybody knows racism, it's Germans. You know, they have their history, they learned how to deal with it, and they know why they're going on the street.
Absolutely. And you know what? I always use Germany as the example, especially when talking about the rebel flag. I always say, do you think that you could go anywhere in Germany and see a statue of a Nazi general?
Hell no.
Or drive past someone's house and see a swastika flag waving out
It's
out in front of
actually
their house?
illegal in Germany to display a swastika outside of a history book. You get arrested because it's considered the symbol of a terrorist criminal organization, and donning any kind of such regalia is completely illegal.
Didn't know that, but I think that's part of the reason why they've been able to move so far up, not without forgetting their history. They still understand their history, but they've been able to move past that history, and the U.S. has not, because they've never really said, okay, you know what, that was a horrible time in our history. That should not have happened. We cannot allow that to happen again. And here are the steps that we're going to do to alleviate that. They've kind of played the passive aggressive thing and say, okay, you know what, we're going to abolish slavery, but you guys can do Jim Crow. It's okay. And then we're going to say, Jim Crow's bad, but then you know what, what is it, what's it called, the school to prison pipelines and the industrial prison complex, and so they've never really come out and said, you know what, hating Black people is wrong. Let's not do that anymore as a country.
Absolutely. We do have another online question. I'm going to talk to that real quick. What is the main thing that is being protested by the Black Lives Matter movement?
I can't really speak for the Black Lives Matter movement because I'm not directly a part of it, but I would assume it's to stop the senseless killings of Black men by police. You know, and the killings is that's just what's the obvious, and like I've been, and I don't know if Steve or Adrian, I might have told you this before, but the killing is the obvious, but when it comes to like other things, like when as a 20-year-old kid going to school, and I was going to school in a college called Fivetown. It was the first school in the States to give a bachelor's degree for audio engineering. It was in like a nice area called Dix Hills, Long Island, where you don't really see Black people like that, except for that school. And while I was in school, I got accused. So police came to the school and said that I was being accused of trying to rape this white girl. And I'm sitting here like, dude, where is she? Like, put her in front of my face so she could actually see my face and know that that wasn't me. And they're like, no, that's not protocol. We have to take you to the precinct. You're not under arrest. I believe you that, that you didn't do it. Long story short, by the time I got to the police precinct, I had 5 cops over me. And mind you, they took me out of school. They didn't take me off some street corner, right? And they said that they put this paper down. They said the best thing for you to do right now is to confess, admit what you did, and then we'll be leaning on you. We have video footage of you. We know you did, and I'm saying video footage. Where the hell how did you magically get video footage of me being somewhere I wasn't, doing something I didn't do? You know? So I ended up going to jail for that because the captain came, he put my lawyer on the phone. My lawyer said, Pat, I know you didn't do this, but these guys want you in jail and there's nothing I could do about it. So I ended up in jail over that. And fortunately, I was in a position that I have a support system that I was able to get a lawyer and prove that I had nothing to do with this. But in this whole experience, what really burned me is all these Black men who weren't in my situation, who were in the same situation of getting accused of doing something they didn't do, right? But not in the same situation of having a support system to help get them out of the system, right? And there's much more of those than there are of me. And so the killings is the obvious, but it gets so much deeper than just the killing. That's why it's systematic racism.
Absolutely.
Because it's systematic. It's from every single perspective you could think of. And that's why this awareness is great, because that's really what people haven't been seeing. You know what I mean? There's all the smaller things that just keep us down on a consistent basis. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Like hearing stories where, like what happened in Central Park, where the woman the gentleman, a black male, was just bird watching, and she called the police on him just because he was a black male. She was saying that he attacked me,
threatened.
He threatened me, and I came across a term the other day called weaponizing the police, where whites are using the police as a weapon against blacks. For the smallest things. It's and so that's another thing we have to deal with. Looking at being in the wrong place at the wrong time, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. It's no way to live, and I think that's what part of the Black Lives Matter is. We don't want to live that way anymore. We don't want to be afraid that if you send out your dad or your brother or even someone that you love to the grocery store, and they may not come home. They and for no fault of their own. Just I'm sorry. Your story it was just heartbreaking to hear, and it's just wrong. It's just wrong to have to live that way, and I think that's for me. That's what the Black Lives Matter says to me.
I got a question real quick that I want to post here. Do you think this has something to do that profit is being made from incarcerating people in the U.S.? I mean, it's a common known fact that the U.S. has the highest per capita number of incarcerated people, and they're predominantly part of minorities. So clearly there is a desire to put as many people in jail as possible because somebody's making money off of it, right?
Absolutely.
So
what's funny is that you mentioned that a girl sent me an article saying that a lot of these record label execs are also shareholders in the prison system. So they stand to gain directly from encouraging, young Black men to rap about ignorant stuff, constantly all this ignorance, which rap was, you know, it wasn't never all this ignorance. You know, there was a balance of you know, of everything.
Yep.
And, you know, so these kids are encouraging other kids to go out there and do nonsense just to fill in the prison system. And some people make money on both sides off of that. So it's interesting that you pointed that out.
I was going to say the same thing, actually, that Chris was mentioning about the whole monetization of things, because I think that has to be certainly taken into account when we're talking about reforms, because America is very much about profit and not about much else. So if we cannot, you know, fix that aspect of it so that we're looking at it more as a community or, you know, civil responsibility, how can we possibly, you know, advance forward with, you know, the idea of, like, when you talk about defunding the police, about taking a section of that budget for them and putting it more into social work for those calls that say the police are responding to a person with mental distress or anything like that. You know, I'm not saying, you know, that police could not still escort said social worker and everything, but, you know, the fact still remains is that, you know, one of the things that has really been brought to light, and I agree with, is that the responsibilities that are put upon police officers, whether they're good or bad, the range is just way too big.
Absolutely. Without question.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, the monetization part of it, until we stop looking at, you know, people as a number that equals profit, you know, the whole thing, part of that is just sickening to me. And I don't understand how any society would allow this to happen for as long as it has. You know, I just, maybe that's my own ignorance. I don't know.
And when you understand the history behind it, sorry to cut you, Adrian, but, you know, when you understand the history of it, not that it makes it easier, but you understand how they got to where they are, because when they abolished slavery, which was in essence the same thing, it was using people for the purposes of profit. You know, the cotton mills, all the industries across the South. You say, okay, we need to stop slavery, but we still have these things that need to get made. And instead of saying, basically rebuild your business model to do it a different way, they outlawed one way but allowed them to figure another way around it. So it's not, they didn't change the mindset behind it. They just found a legal way to do it. And again, they allowed that to happen. So it's compounding, right? So generation after generation after generation, it's like, how are we still here? The problem is, people, as you say, people are making money off of it. And when you have a political system that is so easily influenced by money, the collective interest of the deep pockets is going to drive your policy regardless of morals. At the end of the day, it's company A who needs to produce this, and if I put enough money into politician B's campaign, he has to, for lack of a better term, dance with the one who brought him. He needs to advance my interests, regardless of how he feels about them morally. If he's going to accept my money, he is going to do my bidding.
Yeah,
And
that's in itself.
Right,
Sure.
it's that's how that poisonous cycle just continues, because you're always going to have people over here who are trying to profit, and as long as you allow their desire to profit to influence your laws, you're forever going to end up in a problem.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of our online people that are watching right now said, America is about profit and not much else, but also with the footnote that includes Canada. And and he's right. We're not immune to that whatsoever.
No.
I'd like to think in my own mind, maybe just because I am Canadian, that we're better off or that we know better. But if anything, we've been proven wrong on that time and time again in a lot of instances.
Absolutely.
You know what? I don't think it's that we're better. I think we're just aiming for a better target.
I don't disagree.
We're as a country, we're trying to fix these problems because we have them, and in that respect, we're no better than the Americans. Mm-hmm. Even though the problems, like we said earlier, in our country are probably aiming a little more towards the indigenous populations and stuff like that. But the problem is essentially the same problem. The thing is around in Canada, I think it's part of our policies all the way down from the government, to kind of solve this problem and to make it better. Well, I get the impression that in the States there is no such interest because too many people are making too much money off of it. So that's where being just a little bit socialist kind of, I guess, lessens the impact of profiteering, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
You can take any step, and something that I had looked up recently, just talking about the privatization of since 2000, there's been 120% increase in the population of privatized prisons. And in the same time, in state prisons, there's been an increase of 30%. So, I mean, a lot of people can do a lot of studies and push a stat to say different things, but that's just something that, we could look at and perhaps investigate further.
Mm-hmm.
How do we hold authority figures like police, like the judicial system? How do we hold these people accountable? We've had time and time again, we said we've seen this before. We've seen the videos. We've seen, from Rodney King on, all these things that have happened, and we haven't seen a lot of accountability. We've seen a lot of slaps on the wrist, and we've seen a lot of people basically getting off relatively scot-free. How does that change? How do we hold people accountable to their actions?
Hit them where it hurts. It's just like you guys were saying about, America just being all about the money. It's about hitting them where it hurts. That's the language they'll understand is money. So, it's not spending or spending less, towards, in the places that support, anything that we don't stand for. I don't know how else,
People are talking about defunding the police and and moving those monies to other social programs. How do we does that solve anything, really?
I think, I guess to answer your first question first, and then the second, I think not just in the States, but in Canada as well, I think you need to have more Black people getting more actively involved in the political process. When you talk about, in the States, when you talk about prosecutors, those are elected officials. When you talk about sheriffs, those are elected or appointed officials. So the more Black people you have in positions of authority and positions of power, whether it be elected or appointed, the more influence you're going to be able to have on those policies, in order for whether it be to defund the police and shifting budgets to different places. The more input you have in that conversation when you are when you're at the table. Anyone can shout anything from the street, but if you're sitting at the table, then you have the opportunity to actually provide input into the solution.
I don't know that it's just a matter of having more black. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that it's, in my opinion, it's just more. It's more a thing of having the right person, the right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
Right, because no matter what race you are, you can still be corrupt and you can still be corrupted, and you could be Black and be appointed as some kind of politician, but still somebody else is in your pocket, and you still move, dealing with somebody else's agenda.
True.
So I don't know, man. It's a really complicated issue. But as far as the defunding, I don't really know that that's a solution. I think probably having better educated cops, for one, and maybe a better screening system. I mean, I took an anthropology class years ago, and in that anthropology class, they a portion of it was about Rastafarianism, and they showed us a video that was recorded by the police chief in Seattle. This is years ago, maybe 1990s, right? And the police chief makes this video saying that if you see a Rastafarian, they are more than likely always armed, dangerous. These people are ready to kill. They're ready. And I'm sitting here like, when I'm watching this video, and I'm like, damn, that's like the opposite of what I know of the Rastafarian culture. Absolutely. And I grew up around Rastas. So who is this dude, and where the hell does he get his info from?
Right.
And he's going and miseducating a bunch of rookie cops who may or may not be racist. But what's for sure is, after watching that video and they're patrolling the hood and they see some dude with dreads, they're reacting on fear. Not reacting on sense or logic. It's fear. It's my life or yours.
Right. And they were taught that.
Right. That's what they were taught. It goes back to what you were saying with, what they're taught. So yeah, man, I think it's really about teaching them better screening process and teaching them better.
And I think more civilian accountability as well. I think that even I don't know how effective necessarily RSIU is, but some type of system like that, where you have people who are not law enforcement and not part of the law enforcement structure, investigating law enforcement for misdeeds, whether it be a civilian involved shooting, whether it be corruption. I think having a group of people that's outside of that family, for lack of a better term, to investigate those issues, I think you'll have a better opportunity to actually level appropriate consequences. Because if I'm part of the family, even if I'm internal affairs and I may be looked at as a little bit differently, at the end of the day, I'm still part of the family. So there's a level of bias that's going to come as a result of being part of law enforcement. I'm always going to look at things and approach things from a law enforcement type lens when I'm investigating and giving my my recommendations as a result of that investigation. So I think having a group outside of that, I think would definitely be helpful as well.
I'm going to throw out our last online question. We have another online question. It's from Josh. Does the panel think that our industry will take real steps, assuming things go back to normal, to affect real positive change in regard to Black Lives Matter? Let's make Black Lives Matter. So I guess the ask is if our panel thinks within the industry, not within society, that we would start making real steps towards any sort of positive changes.
And also, what would those steps be? Like, what would we need to do as far as taking steps to actually affect real change, right? You guys got any suggestions or thoughts on that? I know it's a tough one, right?
I've got some thoughts on that. And you know, unfortunately, a lot of these things, as far as how the tone is set from the top. So whether that means you're a union steward, you're the owner of a company, or anything like that, production, AV-wise, whatever the case, even from production companies and such. It would be great to see kind of like a list of statutes that we should all try to live up to as far as our day-to-day interactions within the entertainment industry. Almost like a
charter,
an oath. Yeah, charter, an oath or something like that. You know, how enforceable you make that, that's a tough one too. I mean, but once again, because it has to come from the top, it means that we have to be the ones that are in those positions to fight for that equality and to make sure that everybody is being treated fairly, you know, and regardless of race or creed or any of that, you know. And if it doesn't start from the top, you know, and works its way down,
I gotta slightly disagree with you on that, Steve, though. Because
I think it's a big uphill battle, though. You know, as much as it can start from the bottom and work its way up.
Well, it has to start at the bottom to put those on the top under pressure to actually do something.
I do agree with that. Yes, absolutely.
I think that's the way we have to look at it. Because if we don't do anything, why should they up there do anything, right? So we got to basically force their hand and just make it clear that we're not going to idly stand by and watch them, you know, mistreat our brothers and sisters. That basically, you know, you're not only fighting them, you're fighting us as well.
It should be a process for both sides, really. You know, it should be something that, you know, we come together, you know, about, not one hand trying to force the other, really. It, you know, in an ideal situation. But whether that's the reality of our situation in the industry or even just the industry here in Canada, I don't know. I mean, I think that's maybe a better question for the panel to possibly discuss.
I find the AV, and I mean, this industry has been good to me, man. I don't know about you, Adrian, but I've experienced so much racism outside of this industry, and then came into this industry, and I literally can't even recall, you know, a racist incident. You know, like, I remember one dude making a racist joke, and that's to the extent of my experiences in this industry, you know, with racism.
That kind of lines up what we found out in our episode about inclusion as well, is like that it doesn't seem to be a bias issue that's systemic to our industry. But if it does occur, it's on a person-by-person basis. And as a general, our industry is actually fairly tolerant compared to others. And, you know, discrimination does exist, but it's fairly rare. And it's usually peer pressure kind of weeds it out fairly quickly. At least that's what we've gathered from the last couple of conversations on the subject matter. So I'm kind of glad and in a weird sense proud that our industry seems to be a little better than the average, or at least trying to be a little better than the average. And I think we got to work on that, on expanding that. We if we are in the position to kind of to lead the way and to show people that it can be done and that it works, then we should do that. And hopefully one or the other person will learn from it, and maybe we'll even change some minds and hearts in the process. That's what we're trying to do here on this channel, and that's why we're doing this kind of stuff. Because if we don't do it, nobody will, right?
Yeah. And you know what? Like, the same way that there are, racist white people, there are also racist black people, and a lot of these dudes, their justification towards hating white people is that, white people see what we go through and nobody stands up. So because of that, because they see this oppression and nobody stands up, then we put them all in the same basket, right? So thank you guys for doing this, because this is actually what will make a change, and make people aware, open eyes, that you can't put, no matter what the race is, you can't put them all in one basket. Doesn't matter what the race is. Everybody deserves to be treated on an individual basis. And, that I believe strongly with my heart.
Well,
so thank you guys for this.
Thank you all for, agreeing to help us out with this and participate. What can I say? I mean, you guys are the ones that really make, an episode like this, the episode that it is, and without you guys, we're just a couple of yahoos, talking on the internet.
Well, we're that anyways, but at least we have some yahoos with some guests that have something useful to say, right?
I was going to say that. Thanks for taking that one for me, Chris.
No worries. I know my role here. I know my part, that I'm playing. We're just facilitating people that know better than us to get their voice out there.
Fair enough. And I was gonna add to Patrice, like he said, more conversations like this to help to address the unconscious ignorance.
Right. Maybe we can revisit this in a couple of weeks or couple of months and kind of have a look and see if any change actually happened, or if how things develop. I'd be totally on board with that if you guys were. So I would say this is a good time to wrap this up for today. And cool. I'd like to thank everyone to participate here. It's been great. We had a little rough start in the beginning with getting our live stream going, but I'm sure next time we'll fix that a little bit quicker. And with that, I'd like to say thank you all, and I'm going to roll the outro. Thanks.
Well, before you do that, Chris, okay. I just want to give a special thank you to Adrian Sterling, who agreed to do this, and we didn't have a lot of time to put this together. So thank you so much, Adrian, for agreeing to do this. And
killer job.
Yeah, we're just so happy and beyond the moon that you were able to do this for us, and we're willing to do it for us. So thanks again, everybody. Love to everybody. Love you all.
Yes, enough love and light.
Yeah.
All day.
Lots of love. Lots of love.
Roll the intro, next outro.
Okay. Take care, guys.
All right.
Okay, then.
I'm actually watching on YouTube right now.